fellow exchange students, friends, and or Rotary hopefuls. I am today going to talk about the exchange cycle. Now, this happens to everyone more or less at your own rate, so everyone experiences the exchange cycle a little bit differently. This is what it looks like. It's on the back of our handbook, and basically, as you can see, it's kind of just got its ups and downs. Like, all exchanges have their ups and downs, but sometimes they're not always so even looking like that. Some of them are taller, shorter, wider, thinner. The first step in the exchange cycle would be application anxiety. As you can see, it's number 1. It's actually a low because it's anxiety, so you may not be so excited when you're applying. You may be nervous, you may be worried that you're not going to get in, you're nervous for your interviews, the application process is really long and kind of grueling for Rotary, but they do it because they love you and they want to know the student that they're sending abroad. Number 1 is the first low you will experience in the exchange cycle, and if you make it past that application, you're on your way to step number 2. Step number 2 is, well, actually I think they skipped a step, because step number 2 goes directly to selection and / arrival fascination. I guess it's a high. I mean, under step 2, it's listed elation and expectation. So as you can see, step 2 is up here, up a little bit, and I guess when you're going through the orientation process, you're really excited, you're really happy. I mean, that's how I was. Some students are scared shitless by the orientation progress, pardon my French. I don't know anyone who's dropped out of the program during the orientation process because they got scared. There have been people who dropped out before because they didn't get the country they wanted, but that's another story for another day. So basically, during the whole orientation process, the whole half a year that you have between leaving for your country, the other part of step 2 is the elation when you actually get there. So we have, Rotary calls it a honeymoon period, where basically the first can be anywhere from the first month to the first 2 months, or maybe it's only a week if you go through these phases really fast. The honeymoon period is when you just arrived in your country and you're like, oh my god, this is amazing, I'm in a foreign country and I'm gonna have the best time of my life and everything is so new and cool and different, and basically your mind is just like blown away by everything in the country and you're fascinated and excited. You may not be able to speak the language, but that doesn't matter because you're in a different country and you're gonna live there for a year, so you're really excited. That's how I felt in Japan. When I arrived at the airport, and we drove home from Narita Airport all the way to Ageo, and I was dead tired, but I would not fall asleep in the car. I could not, because I was so busy staring out the window at everything in Japan. Even though the only thing we saw mostly were cars and highway, because the highway's closed in, you can't really see out, but it was amazing. And that is what we call the honeymoon period. I would say that my honeymoon period lasted probably only for about 1.5 months. I wouldn't say that I was actually, I kind of really expected. I knew what I was expecting, so I wasn't surprised by too much. I had a really nice honeymoon period. It's just everything you find amazing about your host country. That's the first 1.5 months, 2 months maybe. So that's an up. Step 3 in the exchange cycle, however, is called initial culture shock, which takes from 1 to 6 months, and this is described by the novelty of your host country wears off. The characteristics are your sleeping habits change, you're disoriented often, and there are language difficulties, lots of fatigue, both mentally and physically, and eating. Here is 3, as you can see, it's down. I think that it should be a little bit more down, so maybe I will adjust it before the end of the video, but anyway. So that's number 3. And the sleeping habits usually increase. You sleep any chance you get. I would say that my culture shock lasted about 2 months in total after the honeymoon phase, so honeymoon phase lasted like all of August and a little bit into September. Then culture shock affected me from like September to November, about. During that period of time, I slept a lot, like a lot. Like, this was before I joined Kendo Club, so I would come home after school every day and have a nap. Being an exchange student is mentally exhausting because you are bombarded with all these new things all the time. Like, your brain never gets a rest. Being an exchange student is a 24/7 kind of thing. Yeah, you sleep a lot. You're disoriented often because you don't know what's going on. I didn't know how to ride the trains in Japan, and I got lost often, so I always had my house mom with me. Language difficulties, even if you have studied the language beforehand, chances are that you are still going to have problems the first few months because, one, studying a language before going to a country, like from a textbook, doesn't necessarily get you prepared for all the actual communication that you do abroad. Like I said, fatigue, mental, physically, both of those a lot. And then eating, this is when exchange students kind of start, it's not really pity eating as much as it is, oh my god, so much new food, I want to eat it all. But that's more in the honeymoon phase. This type of eating is now, you have nothing to do, and food is familiar, so you're gonna go and eat all the food that you like and all the things that are delicious because you don't have any boundaries at this time as an exchange student because you don't know what your boundaries are yet. You're still adjusting to the new country. That's step 3. That's a down. But some people have culture shock for, they can have it up to 6 months, and I don't think I know anyone that had it for that long. A lot of people don't like having culture shock. I know I've talked a lot about reverse culture shock in my other videos, not so much about culture shock because I suppose it didn't really hit me that hard. I was pretty prepared for what I was getting myself into as an exchange student living abroad, so I didn't have like any expectations shattered or things. I was pretty well prepared. Culture shock didn't hit me all that hard, which is why I don't talk about it so much. That's a down, but don't worry, don't fret. The next one, number 4, is an up. Number 4 step in the exchange cycle is called surface adjustments. So this is after the first initial down, and you kind of settle in at this point, so you kind of find your niche in your new society. Your language improves slightly, not too much, I would say, because this still happens the first half of the year. You begin to learn and navigate the culture, so now you're starting to learn what new cultural cues are, and you're starting to make sense of what the cultural faux pas are, so you stop kind of making a fool of yourself because you get a little bit of understanding of what is okay to do and what is not okay to do. You get friends. In my case, it was not so much school friends, like Japanese friends, as it was I became friends with all the other exchange students, and we had a really great time. We only started to, the first time I met the other exchange students was in September, but we didn't start hanging out until like November because we were all in that honeymoon phase, so we all wanted to do our own thing. But then when we slowly kind of got culture shock, we kind of came together as that group of support that you hear so much about when you become an exchange student. Then you get a social life, which is the best thing you can hope for as an exchange student. So even if it's not with the locals, other exchange students are just as great. Although you have to make an attempt to make friends with the local people of your host country because you're not going to learn anything by hanging out with other foreigners. Don't be that kid. Language improves, navigate culture, friends, social life. That's number 4 in the exchange cycle. Going up, but now we're going back down to number 5, which is here. It's here on the cycle, but I think it should be much longer because number 5 is probably the lowest of the lows when it comes to the exchange cycle. Number 5 is called mental isolation, which is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. This mental isolation is signatured by frustration increases, so you get frustrated a lot. There's a new sense of isolation, which somehow is worse than the old sense of isolation in step 3. More often than not, you're bored, and you have a lack of motivation. You get very lethargic, lazy. There are a lot of unresolved problems going about when you're in step 5, and you come back to your language problems. So it's the lowest of the low, I think. Actually, no, wait, I'll save the lowest of the low for last, but number 5 is the pretty bad part. It's around the time where you have, sometimes you have, this is around Christmas time, so students get very homesick People tend to miss their families. If you're in a country that doesn't celebrate Christmas and you celebrated Christmas previously, sometimes that comes down a little bit hard on people. In Japan, they don't necessarily celebrate Christmas for the Christmas meaning of Christmas. They kind of celebrate Christmas because they think it's a cool thing, and it's basically a commercialized holiday in Japan. Even through that, I thought it was really charming, just because solely for the fact that I love Christmas lights and nothing else. Like, I could care less about presents. I just like Christmas lights and having family, so I didn't really get culture shock because my host family did a really good job of making me feel welcome and loved. And I had stayed with my first host family for Christmas, so I actually had one of the best Christmases of my life with my host family, so that was very enjoyable, and luckily I didn't get so low down on the exchange cycle as some people did, and that's a lucky thing to have. So keep in mind that everything will get better. No matter what point in the year you are, it always gets better as an exchange student, so just don't give up. Like I said, there's boredom. The new sense of isolation is the fact that you're starting to realize that you want to make friends more with the locals. I wanted to make friends more with the Japanese people in my class. I wanted to make friends with my classmates, but then the language problems come in, and they're just like, you're trying to talk to these Japanese high schoolers, and you're just like, hey, what's up? I don't know how to say, do you want to hang out on the weekend? And they're just like, what? So it kind of works like that. But anyway, it will get better, I promise. So just, if you feel really down in the dumps and you can't get rid of it, just find your local exchange student, another exchange student, and just go get a hug from them, because they will always be there for you. It's a true fact. That is, unless you don't have a lot of other exchange students in the district. Just, it'll get better, I promise. Because the best part of your exchange is coming up. So number 5 is the worst part, but number 6 is the best part of your exchange. This part usually happens anywhere from right after the New Year, so after New Year's, anywhere to all the way to the end of your exchange. It's called integration and acceptance. That is step 6 in the exchange cycle. And what happens is you begin to examine the society that you're in, and you start to accept the surroundings, and you start to accept yourself. Exchange students all go through a transformation when they're abroad, and that's one of the hard parts, like in the down steps, when it's like 3 and 5, you kind of question yourself, but in 6, it's like, you finally understand everything that goes on, and it is just the best feeling in the world. That happened to me pretty much in January. From January on, I just had all the things that I had previously worried about gone, and I just had a great time. Your language skills start improving rapidly. You become basically almost a native of your host country, except that if you're like me and you're in a Asian country, say Japan, you'll never really be a native, but you become quite close to it because you learn all the slang and you make all the friends. 6 is just one of the best. It's just that period from January to May, June, or July is usually the second half of the year of the exchange is definitely the better half, I'd have to say. Even though, because it's weird that I say that, because I stayed with my first host family for 8 months, which was the whole first half of my exchange, which I enjoyed so much because I love them so much and they did so much for me. In terms of actual fitting in and getting along in Japanese society, I'd have to say the second half of the year definitely is better, because my Japanese is better, your language will be better, you start making real friends, and you finally learned how the trains work, so you basically start creating your own life for you as if you had lived there for all your life. That's number 6. It's really good. And then number 7, unfortunately, it's a down again, but it's not so much a down as it is it should be like a straight line, because you're kind of on the high of number 6, where you're like fitting into society finally, and you're getting along with everyone, and you're doing all this stuff, so number 7 is more of a straight line than down, because it's basically return anxiety, and this is characterized by you're preparing for your departure, you realize that the changes that have happened to you over the past year, you have a really strong desire to stay in your host country, like everyone does. Although some people were really excited to go home, and I don't know why. For the life of me, I couldn't figure it out, because I wanted to stay in Japan forever. The results of these things are confusion and or pain, the breaking of bonds, and there's no promise of renewal in the future, which means that there's no guarantee that you will go back to your host country anytime soon. I guess it can be a negative, but for me, it wasn't really negative. It just kind of was like a straight line, a placid line, because I really tried to push off thinking about departure until the very last week. Like, I didn't say goodbye to anyone until the very last week. Everyone was like, oh, when are you leaving? You're leaving so soon. I was like, nope, I'm not leaving. No. And then the last week I was like, yeah, I'm leaving, guys. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna miss you all. But yeah, so if you're like me, or most exchange students, you'll be in denial, and you'll just be like, no, not leaving. I'm staying here forever. I'm gonna stay in my host family's basement forever. They won't know I'm there. Or I'll just hide and miss my plane. You start coming up with all these crazy excuses to try and stay in your host country, and it's just the funniest thing. It is a little bit of a rough time, but it's kind of leveled out by the fact that you've suddenly become so good at living in your new country. So I'd say it's kind of like a check and balance kind of thing rather than a straight down thing. And what I don't understand is step 8, where it's a high again. I would kind of say that it should be 6, should be an up and then slightly go down, be a straight line, go up a little bit and then just go straight back down, because like I said, even though I said number 5 was the lowest, I'm gonna say number 8 in the cycle was the lowest, because number 8 was shock and reintegration. And that means that you're back in your home country. And that means you're about to go through reverse culture shock. Or you are going through reverse culture shock. And to me, that was the hardest thing. And it still is the hardest thing. Because I am still riding that number 8